check this out. We've got something really fun today. This is so amazing. Oh man, again?
7.1, absolute value. For a real number a, the absolute value is written like this, with the a inside these straight vertical absolute value brackets. Make them a bit longer than you would numbers. If I was going to write the absolute value of 5 and I got sloppy, it might look like 151. So make sure you exaggerate the length of these absolute value brackets so you don't confuse yourselves and others. It is the distance from a number to 0, and therefore it's always a positive number. Determine the value of the absolute value expression. The absolute value of 5 is 5, because 5 is 5 units from 0. The absolute value of negative 100 is 100, because negative 100 is 100 units away from 0. Of course, they won't always be this easy. Determine the value of the absolute value expression. Now remember, absolute value work like brackets, so we follow our regular BEDMAS rules. Let's evaluate what's inside the inner brackets first. So 12 plus 2 is 14. And on this side, negative 8 minus 5 is negative 13. And 8 times 14 is 112. And 6 times negative 13 is negative 78. Notice we're not doing any absolute value right now. We're only working with what's inside the absolute value brackets. Next, we've got the absolute value of 132 and the absolute value of negative 78. And now we're ready to do the absolute value. The absolute value of 132 is just 132. And the absolute value of negative 78 is positive 78. So when we add those together, we get 210.
Now we can do this on our calculators. If we go over to math and then over to number, and then it's the first option, abs, and we can type in the question. Just remember to close the absolute value function here with a closing bracket. And we get the same answer, 210.
Can you take the absolute value of the individual terms inside the absolute value brackets? So I've made myself a simple example here to test this. On this side I have the absolute value of negative 3 plus 5, and that would be the absolute value of 2. On this side I have taken the absolute value of the individual terms, so the absolute value of negative 3 is 3, and the absolute value of 5 is 5. And you can see that this is not going to work out. The absolute value of 2 is 2, and 3 plus 5 is 8. So you cannot take the absolute value of the individual terms. You need to determine the value of what's inside the absolute value brackets before you're allowed to proceed. Then what would we do with a question like this, where we have a variable inside the absolute value brackets that's any real number? Therefore, it changes the value inside here. Well, in this case, there is something we can do. When we look at this quadratic here, it is always positive or equal to 0. When we look at this quadratic here, this one's always negative or equal to 0. So there's something we can do here. For the first one, since it's always positive or equal to 0, the absolute value brackets are actually doing nothing. So we can just remove them. In the second one, this one's always negative or equal to 0. So if we just multiply by negative and cancel this negative sign out, then we will always be positive or equal to 0. And the last one, just dealing with numbers, is negative 15. Now we can multiply out and simplify. This would be x squared minus 10x plus 25. This would be minus x squared, and this is plus 15. The x squareds will cancel, left with negative 10x plus 40. Now you notice that all the negative signs did not disappear. So just because you have absolute value does not mean you won't have a negative in your final answer. This was part of Algebra and Number 1, Demonstrate an Understanding of the Absolute Value of Real Numbers. There's some questions. See if you know what you're doing.